Welcome to the Phil Podcast. I am your host, Sam Iscabel. We have a great episode for you today. The host of I Like Birds podcast will be joining us. We have a great conversation. We talk about family, we talk about church, we talk about the journey of podcasting and many other things. You'll see all the links to Zack Rippey and what he's doing in the description below. And I'm going to read you a little bio on him, and then we'll jump right into the episode. Zack Rippey initially pursued a career in stand-up comedy before a transformative encounter that led him to become a voice for Jesus, inspired by a profound experience with the Gospel of John during the chaos of 2020. Zack felt called to start the I Like Birds podcast. Despite doubts and fears, Zack launched the show in May 2020, quickly becoming a beacon of light for many and leading them to Christ. Encouraged by the podcast impact and confirmation from God, Zack enrolled in Bible school, embarked on a full-time RV journey with his family, and later settled in Texas. Now he continues to spread the gospel through his podcast and other ministry endeavors, recently releasing his debut book, 21 Days in Africa. Despite the show's success, Zack remains focused on serving the Lord and growing in faith, inviting listeners to join him on his journey. Zack, thank you so much for coming on the Phil Podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation. I felt like we had some great questions and you had some great insight to share with us. And so now here is the episode. I hope you enjoy the conversation. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Phil Podcast. Thank y'all for tuning in. Thank you for all your support. Thank you for everything. It's so fun to sit down and have great conversations with so many people. I feel like that's one of the great things in life, is to be able to have talks with individuals that you can learn from, people that you admire. It's so good. And so today I have a great guest, Zack Rippey from the I Like Birds podcast. I know what you're saying. What kind of name is that? So he's going to explain it to us in a minute. It makes sense to me because I've been following him for a while, but it's just kind of a funny name. But everything starts off funny until you make it happen, and you start making some noise, and all of a sudden the name becomes a brand.
Right.
And I believe that you're getting there with every interview and event that you have. You just keep on growing. So Zack, welcome to the Phil Podcast. But I just want to jump right in. Let's start with a little say hello, a brief introduction, and then we'll get going.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. First and foremost, it's a beautiful setup out here in Fort Worth, Texas. Make sure you're following and showing some love to Sam. He does an awesome job of getting the word out there for people. And yeah, man, my name is Zack Rippey, and I like birds. You know, it's a name that I feel like gets brought up all the time. You know, It's something that is, as soon as, a conversation gets started about it, people often be like, "You're the birds guy." You know, it's kind of funny to hear that. But basically, it started with my faith journey, man. I started really diving into the Word of God, and I started seeing that the dove was a representation of the Holy Spirit. And then when the Lord called me to start a podcast, I was outside, looking outside. It was during COVID, so we were kind of on lockdown, and the birds were free. And I was reading scriptures about how the Lord will provide for the sparrows, He will provide for you. So it all kind of incorporated, in the centric of a bird. And one day I was just asking the Lord, what do I call this thing? And I was like, I like birds. The thought just came, and then He gave me the revelation and the slogan of, I like the Bible and I like words, so therefore I like birds.
Yeah, it's like the celebrity couples that get together and then they mix their names. Mm-hmm. And so it's Bible and words that are cut in half and then pasted together. And so he likes the Bible and he likes words. He's a writer. He has a book here. We'll show it to you in a second. And so I Like Birds, interesting name. I thought it was, when I first heard it, I said, I think the failed podcast kind of falls into that because it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. But it's being more, as people hear what we're doing here, then they understand what's going on.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. And that's something that attracted me to your podcast. It was a cool idea. It was interesting. And a lot of people want to talk about their wins on social media. Not many people want to talk about their losses.
Yeah. So we're going to touch a little bit on failures and challenges. I like the lessons that come from it. Sometimes we forget to talk about those things. I think that's what can connect a lot of people is when you say, I failed at this, and then they say, well, me too. And we have something to talk about. Sometimes on the upper end of it, sometimes we're not seeing eye to eye because people are at different levels. But failure, boy, we have a lot of things in common. And so that's a topic that I really like. Introduce your book. I'm going to put the camera on you. Hold it up and tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, man. So this is the first book I've ever written, and I'm working on another one right now. But this is the first one I wrote in the end of 2022 is when it was published. I actually went on a mission trip in the end of 2021, early 2022 to Africa. White boy went to Africa. I was called Muzunga when I was there, and it was supposed to be a 10-day journey of loving on orphans, widows, and helping people in need while also preaching the gospel there at church as well as on a New Year's Eve event. Ended up getting stuck there for the last 7 days. I popped a positive for PCR test, so I couldn't fly home. So my wife was pregnant, and I had to stay an extra 7 days. So I used that time to start writing this book because the journey was just so incredible, and God was really moving big time there. So I wanted to open up the eyes of people that lived in America to what goes on here and just communicate that the joy of the Lord is still there, and humanity has a desperate need for a savior in Jesus Christ. And I was able to make people laugh through the book. It's lighthearted. It actually has 27 5-star reviews on Amazon, and people are still buying it to this day. I actually heard a cool story today. I went to Oak Creek Homes, which was where I bought my home, and the guy that sold me my home has my book on his shelf behind him. And somebody came in today, or somebody came in the other day, and basically saw the book and was like, I've been seeing that book everywhere. And I was like, what? That is crazy. You know, the fact that Kevin told me that today, he ended up buying her a book, and she ended up buying a house, and so he's giving her the book as like a thank you, you know, and I signed it for her and everything, but it just showed like the power of good writing, you know, and the power of just sharing what God puts on your heart. So it's been a blessing for people and for me as well.
Well, congrats.
Thank you, bro.
That's an accomplishment. There's so many people that say, I want, and then they fill in the blank. The fill in the blank, it's such a difficult thing. Like, it's so hard. It's so easy to be creative. It's so easy to come up with ideas, but the ideas and creativity stops once you start putting in the work, because it just requires a lot of time and effort. And so the fact that you did it, I just wanted to commend you on that.
Thank you, brother.
Here at the Failed Podcast, I like to kind of go down people's journeys. I know that, you share your testimony on your podcast, and you talked about the times that you weren't at church, and then you came to Christ, and you changed your life around. You found this new avenue in the podcast and kind of just being a positive message in the world. But where did Zack come from? What was some of your early years like at home? Some of the things that maybe some challenges or failures you faced at a young age that you use now when you talk to people and you say, man, this lesson came from, and then, you go way back.
Good question. I've experienced a lot of loss in life. I've experienced missing people a lot that have been close to me. I've experienced, my mom used to travel for work when I was a kid. My family dynamic was a little chaotic. There was a lot of arguing that went on in the house. There was a lot of just turmoil and friction because we weren't in a godly house per se. And so it's interesting though, because like when you laugh and when you make people laugh and when you smile and when you're successful, people think everything's great. But under the hood, there's been a lot of trauma. There's been a lot of hurt. I lost my best friend in 2020 as well, about 6 months after finding God, which that was really hard because it was it was a real faith journey and faith testing. So a lot of the advice I give has come from, and I don't even say I'm one to give advice. I just try to be a light and try to see the positive, because I've seen a lot of darkness, and I know that I'd rather choose the light, in life, and encourage people to do the same, because it gets you further. It gets you in a place of being able to be healed. It gets you in a place of being able to have appreciation for life and let you see the beauty. And it's something that I feel very passionate about, because man, there's so much negativity everywhere. Everywhere you look, you can find something that'll really just bum you out.
Yeah.
You know, and I want to be able to communicate something that brings people. I ran into this kid at the gas station today, bro.
Yeah,
it was crazy. I told you that story about the book on the Oak Creek Homes thing. Literally right before I came here, bro, I would change my shirt in the parking lot of QT. I walked inside. This 21-year-old kid came up to me, saw my shirt, and says, "Hey man, I listened to your podcast. You're doing a great job."
Wow.
And I said, "What? Like, are you kidding me?"
Great.
This kid I've never met before started sharing with me. He's been seeing it all over Instagram. He's like, "Yeah, man, you're really growing it." And like, it's awesome. I go to St. Peter's Church over here in Fort Worth, and like, just opening up to me about it and just showing love. And that's the first time that's ever happened like that. And it happened on the same day. First the book thing, and then that. So it showed me that like people are tuning in that like you don't even know. You know, and that's a powerful thing, because it shows that your voice truly matters. And I always say this: never underestimate your voice for Jesus. Because it's one of those things where it's like you never know who you're impacting, you never know who you're reaching, and that's why the slogan that we have, "Do it for the one," really is communicated on every episode we try to have.
Well, here at the Fellow Podcast, and me as an individual, I really believe in the power of storytelling. And so the same way that you're kind of saying like your life and your voice matters, for me, someone's story does matter. But sometimes we zoom through it so fast. We go through things and we don't know how to process it, or no one's ever asked us, what have you been through and what have you learned? And that's what we try to do here. And so as you're sharing right now, and congrats, man, to remember that guy. You know what I mean? That's such a milestone for a podcaster or an influencer when someone recognizes you just out in the world. So
I know, it was wild, dude. I was like, what?
But your podcast brings in a lot of people who have a lot of wisdom and years in church and in ministry, but overall in helping people. And I've heard many of your episodes, and earlier you said, like, no, you know, I'm not much for giving advice. You know, I just want to, but I'm wondering, why would you say that? Because I feel like you are a place and a platform where people can seek advice. Now, it doesn't always come from you, but you are directing it, and you do offer more advice than maybe you give yourself credit to. So I'm asking this because a lot of people feel like that, but they've already passed that, and they're giving not only a great example, but they're giving good advice. So tell me a little bit about why you said that.
Well, I think advice is very it's very like, you should listen to this rather than let me encourage you in this. You know, advice is something that I think should be seeked after rather than like propositioned. You know, like, I'm going to give you advice on this. Like even today with the camera, like I kind of gave advice. I'm like, yo, let's move it a little bit this way so it has more of a 45 shot. You know, it's more of like being confident enough to like share your wisdom and share your encouragement. But I don't think I'm one to give life advice, and I would say this, my pastor said this about me recently. He says, you're very naturally curious, but you're not as strong in certain things that you should be strong in when it comes to like faith or life, you know. I'm like, I'm very like, I knock on your door a lot, pastor, I know, you know. But and it's true. It's because it's like this natural curiosity to learn, to grow, to do better. I've only been walking with Christ like fully, like on the road, like actually being able to put on the jersey for about 4 years now. So it's kind of like I'm still in this process of like, I'm still learning, and I want to be, it's almost like I'm not ready to surrender my what's it called, basically my like I'm the student still, and I'm not ready to surrender that and be the teacher. You know, even though I've on my previous episodes, from like episode 1 to probably like 140, I was teaching the Bible. You know, so therefore I was giving advice.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you know, so I guess I was doing that, but in the same breath, it's like I try to encourage people in a certain direction rather than just kind of you know, give them the direct, like, you need to be doing this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and for me, it's because it like of me growing up and how I grew up, where I struggled with reading and writing, and communication was my avenue for me to connect with people. And so it took a while for me to get there to say, this is where I'm strong at, because this is where I was developed, right? But once I figured that out, then I was all in. And so when I see you and I watch you, that's where I can tell where your strengths are. And so I just want to encourage you that you are an advice giver, and you've given great advice from what I've heard. And I've heard
thank you.
Hours and hours and hours. I got evidence, brother. I got evidence. So you can't, that's why I just want, I'm not calling you out, but I want people to hear us saying that, because sometimes we get stuck in saying something that you've already outgrown. So accept that victory,
that's
right?
real.
Accept that, and then move in it.
Yeah, I got to be careful though. I have a tendency. I have to walk a fine line of humility and confidence, because I am one to be like, I could be super like cocky / arrogant if I'm not careful. And luckily, since coming to Christ, I've been a lot better with that. But also like, your boy got sauce, you know what I mean? Sometimes I got to turn up to sauce. So I like walk a little bit of a line of like, making sure that I'm still humble, and it's not like putting on the face of humility. It's more so like, let me program my thoughts to be humble in that, you know?
So confidence and humility, you're saying that there's a fine line.
There is a fine line, yeah.
So are you saying that you're very confident and your humility is kind of toning that down, or you're very humble and you need a little confidence to boost your
No, I'm very confident, and I try to use humility as a way of I'm humility before Christ. And, obviously if somebody comes on our show that has more knowledge and more experience and more wisdom, I'm very quick to listen, And I think that's what makes a great podcast host, is being able to share that wisdom and that advice and that encouragement at any point, but also having the knowledge to know when to listen. And that's something that I've kind of learned throughout the last few seasons of I Like Birds, since we've been in the podcast studio with guests on and with video. It's like, I come last, God comes first, my guest comes second, even my producer Taylor comes third, our audience comes fourth, then I come fifth, you know what I mean? So it's like, I have to learn that last line of what humility looks like, in the sense of like, we're going to honor our guest here, we're going to honor the Lord here, and then I'll share those things.
So you said that you accepted Christ, you changed your life around recently. What was it, 2020?
Yeah, 2020. Yep.
2020. So what was the transition like? Because, and I'm asking this because I want people to learn in the sense that we transition from, whether it be heartache to recovery, we transition from a bad relationship to a good relationship. We transition to a lot of things, from negative to positive. For you, it's like, I didn't know Christ, I wasn't 100% in, and then I am, right? So that transition, you have to come to terms with some things that you got wrong. Like, in other words, you say, I failed myself. Like, my belief was wrong, the way I was living was wrong. What were some of the challenges and failures that you had to tell yourself during that transition in order for you to begin to change?
Great question again, man. You're solid. I think living for the world is the big thing that I had to overcome. It's so easy to be distracted by the things of the world that are not what God has in store for you. So I was pursuing stand-up comedy at the time, heavy, bro. I was on stage 5 to 6 nights a week, every single week, 7 to 10 stages every week. So some nights I would be at 2 different shows. On the weekends I would do 2 shows. I would travel for it. I would write jokes in the daytime. I'd be with my family in the living room, thinking of jokes, writing jokes, scratching out bits, adding tags, thinking of calendar dates, thinking of our next sponsor, our next liquor sponsor for a show, thinking how to sell tickets, thinking what clips to post. Everything was revolved around stand-up. It was all around the world. It was all around like fame. How can I reach this next level of success? But then I realized, once I got into the Gospel of John, that God wanted me to use the gifts that he gave me to glorify him rather than myself. Because that's what I was doing. I was going on stage, make people laugh, and then I would be quick to go get a drink afterwards and keep that high energy going and keep that fun going. And don't get me wrong, I had some amazing times. I had some great laughs. I had some great community when it comes to stand-up days. I made really great connections with people, but it was all for the wrong reasons. It was all not to glorify God. It was more to, make myself feel better based on the pain maybe I was dealing with from previous experiences in life, or that's the only way I felt I was able to have value in the world, is like, can I make somebody laugh? Can I be on this show? Can I get booked here? It was like I was looking for my value in all the wrong places, when I really needed to be looking for it in the Lord. And that's where my new identity came from. So that big transformation came from like, I once thought this, but God says this, so let me reshape my thinking to be this. It's having a new biblical worldview, and that's not easy to do as flesh, because we have fleshly desires, constantly. We have to Paul says we have to beat the flesh and choose the spirit. So if I'm not willing to choose the spirit and I'm trying to choose the flesh, I'm going down not God's will. And if I don't go down God's will, he can't bless disobedience. So if I want to be blessed and in good favor, I have to walk with him. Even if it sucks, even if it's muddy, even if I fail, as long as I'm on that path with him and I'm choosing him every single day. And that's what the podcast does. It gives me almost like a job for Christ. It allows me to serve him Writing books about him allows me to serve him with the gifts that he gave me. And I think everybody has that. They just don't always know where that is or where that purpose is. You know, for you, it's conversation. So it's like you're honoring God, and maybe you connect with God through the conversations. And that's probably how you lead people to the cross. You lead people to church. You lead people to community and tuning into the show. And therefore, you're providing that value to them in their life.
So you're obviously a professional. So we're gonna touch on a lot of stuff you talked about, but you sped up a little bit on me. So let's go back to your comedy days. What kind of comedian were you, right? They say comedians really come from, like, through a lot of struggle. Like, once they zoom in on the big comedians, they had a rough life, they had some tough things they had to go through, and they turn that dark stuff into humor. Everyone else is laughing, but they're going through it every time. How was your comedy developed? What did it sound like? How would you describe it? And how did you come out of it? Do you continue to do comedy?
I do comedy from time to time. So I still run an open mic in Fort Worth at the Mad Hatter neighborhood pub on Monday nights at 9:30. So come through if you ever want to come check it out. And that's kind of where I just kind of stay sharp a little bit. You know, I work on my hosting skills. I work on being in front of the room. I'm also in the world there, you know, so it's how do I be salt and light while I'm there? I'm talking to comedians about God. I'm talking to bar guests about God, even though they say don't ever talk about, you know, religion in a bar. It's like, hey, your boy does. Okay. And it's been really cool. I've been able to really pour into some guys there. And as far as what my comedy used to be like, it was interesting though, because it was like, you know how when you're, you know, the first 3 years of something, you're like kind of figuring that out, right? So I would tell what I liked in comedy was dirty, and like that was where my mind was. I was perverse in my mind, you know. So I would think of dirty jokes. I would think of family jokes, but how do I add in a dirty joke? And that's the thing. I was more on the clean side than most of my peers, but still, that's kind of where the edginess kind of thought process would come in, and I'd write about that. And when it comes to my past, I would try to write about my past, but it was hard to like be vulnerable and get there to the point where like the crowd would believe it or like be invested in it with me, and trying to make that funny was usually a challenge. You know, like I had a joke about back in the day about my dad used to take me to one of his friend's house while he did drugs inside, and me and this kid played hide and go seek in the backyard. And we played this game where we had to knock 3 times on the sliding glass door if we ever saw a cop. Like that was part of the rules of the game. You know? So like stories like that where it was like, oh man, like that's crazy, like that's deep, but also like it's kind of funny, you know, like, and the kid couldn't really talk, so he, you know, so he was a little like, you know. Anyway, so it was one of those situations where trying to be real, try to be honest, trying to be vulnerable while also trying to get laughs was the main focus. You know, whatever worked, I did. So like if it got a laugh, even if it wasn't true, if it got a laugh, I'm keeping it. You know?
So transitioning out of habits is so difficult, you know, and obviously you were doing comedy, and you could probably use every word in the dictionary, and it kind of helped you probably be a comedian, right? Cuss words, you could cuss and say whatever. So when you start transitioning bad habits for good habits, how hard was it for you? And I ask this because here on the Feld Podcast, we don't cuss. And I have a lot of guests, and I tell them, don't, you know, try not to, but if you do, I'm going to edit it out. And I don't use foul language. I stay clean, you know, 24/7. That's just that's my standard, right? But it is challenging. You know what I mean? Because in my head, I'm still angry sometimes. You know, no one can hear me, but it's in there. And so how hard was it for you to break some of those bad habits that you were free to be in and then transition? And then now you have some restrictions. Obviously, you do it with, you know, humbly, but there you have to change the way you behave.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did that happen? Did you struggle with it? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. There's definitely times where, you know, you're trying to be you, but also love the Lord, you know? And I don't think, you know, Christ says to pick up your cross and follow him daily. So a lot of those things you have to surrender of you. But it's not so much of like your soul, your personality. It's more like the things that are not of God. So whether it be cursing, for instance, it's like I used to curse a lot more freely and not even think twice about it. But now that I know that the power of life and death is in the tongue, now I know like, hey, maybe I should choose better words for that. maybe I should lean into more of like better language. Oh, you're a writer? Prove it. Use better language. Yeah. Be more polished, And even some things such as, jealousy and gossiping and gluttony and alcohol. Like there's all these things that, you can definitely not even pay attention to because the culture in the world never comes down on you for those things.
Yeah.
But as soon as you start reading the Word of God and you start feeling that conviction, you almost got to surrender it to him. Like he is the one that's going to deliver you from it. And I say that the same God that died for you will deliver you from those sins and those things that you're struggling with. So those habits, it's almost like if I try to do it myself, I would fail miserably. But if I rely on God to help me surrender that, he'll take it away from me. And that's what he does. He delivers and he pulls things out of you and he breaks the chains, and you want to do right by him. Like I love the Lord. Like I want to do right by him. And even though my flesh is weak, even though I fail and I stumble, I know that his grace is sufficient.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let me ask you this. And it's not for me. I'm asking, but just go with me. So we do things, for Christ, and we say, yeah, I'm making this change. I want to be better, and Christ helps me. What do you do for you? And I'm asking because I don't think there's any guilt if you have some goals and you have some standards for yourself. Obviously, I know that the Bible is your foundation and everything comes from that. But what did you do for yourself, per se, right? That you can give yourself credit for. And I ask this because sometimes it's hard for us to give ourselves credit for certain things. What have you done? What did you have to kind of do on your own in the beginning? You did end up going to college, right? Christian college or Bible school.
For a couple of years, yeah.
And so you learned a lot of things there, but before you learned those things, or before you were deep, right? Before you put on the jersey, you had to make some changes on your own. And then everything started adding up a little bit later. What were some of those things? Like, an instance, going home to your wife. Now you're talking different. Now you're arguing different. Now the outcome's a little bit different, but you're figuring it out. What were some of those things? What did it look like?
Yeah, well, I would say, one of the things that I felt so, proud of was surrendering pornography.
Yeah.
That was a big one. That was the one that I was like, I never imagined that I would be able to not look at it again. It was like in my life since I was before, I think it was like 5th grade. I remember I got introduced to it. 7th grade, I was running home off the school bus to watch it, so it was in my life for a long time. And so one of the things that I did practically that I could control was I unfollowed. Every single time a hot girl pulled up on my Instagram, I pressed unfollow. Even if I didn't want to, even if she was one of my favorites, at the time. I bit the tongue, I bit my lip, whatever, and said, because I want to overcome that. Because that would lead to temptation, to do that. And then so next thing you know, my whole Instagram's being cleaned up. And since recently, honestly, the Explore page has been coming after me again. So I'm even now I'm kind of considering what do I do about this, so it's not even the Explore page, I'm going to the Explore page. It's when you go to Explore page to search somebody's name,
I know, it's
boom, and it's stop. You know what I mean? So anyway, so that was the one chain that I felt that broke, that made me realize okay, I kind of helped the situation by being better. I also confessed it to my wife, and that was a big one too. I was in the kitchen one night and I shared that with her, and she was really hurt by it. She was really upset by it. But if I couldn't confess it to her, then I couldn't move on from it. And that was a big thing, So I think a lot of what we're afraid to be vulnerable about and share about are the things that are actually going to be that first step you need to take in order to move on a better path. And she was better. She was, I don't want to say understanding, but she worked with me through it. And it never was a ongoing issue or an ongoing argument or anything. It was a one-time, conversation. And then from there, it was almost she trusted me to turn away from it.
Props to her. Okay. So let me ask you something on that. So there's a lot of guys, and we're married, and we're struggling. We struggle with communication, with how we're going to fight, how we're going to forgive each other. So once you did that first one, because you picked the hard one. You're I got to tell you something. And it's a difficult thing because you don't know what's going to happen. And she has a right to react however she wants.
Yeah.
So you went all in and you said it. So after that, what was next? Was it easier? Did you feel like your relationship elevated? And I'm asking because there's guys watching right now who want to say something so that they can take their relationship to another level, but they can't get themselves there.
Absolutely.
So what happened after that first one? What was like the next one? Did she come to you and say something? What did it do health wise to the relationship?
Man, it honestly elevated things so much, bro, to the point where it was like she looked different to me after that. Like I saw her in a whole new light. I had like a weight off my shoulders. I felt more close to her. I felt like more intimacy with her. I also didn't feel like I had expectations of her anymore that were unrealistic or unfair or in any way that weren't honoring to God or honoring to our marriage. You know, like because in that world, bro, you go down a spiral. It spirals. You know,
never ending.
Yeah, you start with one thing, and next thing you know, you're progressing to something you never even thought you'd ever, have eyes for. You know, So, and that's the thing that was such a bummer about it is like it really was warping my mind. It was really like keeping me honestly away from Christ as well. It was like that one because Paul talks about this. The sexual sin is like the one that is defiling to your own body. Your body is a temple, and if Christ lives inside of you, you're basically damaging yourself. So and you're like you're hurting Him. Like that's big. So and our relationship definitely shifted and went in a better direction. And it wasn't in any way strained. It was just a like you're saying, it was a habit from the past that kind of kept lingering into the marriage, and then I didn't feel guilt for it. And that's the thing too, bro, because your mind was warped. And I shared this on one of our like Patreon episodes way back when, but I'll share it with your audience right now. But I was in the comedy days living for the world, and I would literally plot in my mind, oh, if I make it big, like these girls know what's up. Even though I loved my wife, even though like I was madly in love with her, you know what I mean? And at the same time, it was just because my mind was warped from what I was putting into these eye gates that it was that way, So our relationship got way better, our marriage is way better, and now we've had multiple kids since then, and every time we try, your boy 100% from the free throw line.
So okay. So you mentioned before you accepted Christ, you were doing comedy, and your goals and what you wanted to achieve was a certain way, and now you look at things different. Okay, so I want to fill in the blank for people who. What I see in the world is this: is that you make money, that's it. You go crazy. You're gonna have women. You're gonna travel. I mean, you get to live the extreme life that you see on TV, and sadly enough, that seems like where a lot of people end up. Hence, Puff Daddy and all the perversion that he is in. But he had access to it because of money and power.
You're right.
And so, let alone like, everyone, anyone is susceptible to it. It's just that like appealing. Okay. Right. So now you're doing podcasting. You wrote a book. And I understand that, you're doing it from a good place, but success may come to you, right? Money may come to you and some power through your podcast and what you're doing, right? All glory to God. Like I get that. Yeah. But now how has your mind shifted? Now, where does your money lead you? Where does your money lead your heart and your mind now?
Man, that's real. I'm gonna be real with you, man. It's we're in this season right now, my wife and I, where I kept relying on faith to pay our bills. And despite the ministry success, despite the podcast success, despite the book success, that don't mean life is successful. That don't mean your finances are successful. Yeah. And while I do think it's coming, I tell my wife all the time, I'm gonna be a millionaire. I think this podcast, I think these books, I think just God's hand on me is going to make that happen. And I always ask the Lord. I don't ask Him for riches anymore. I ask Him for wisdom, because in the Bible, in Proverbs 3, it says wisdom. In the left hand of wisdom is great riches and high honor, and in the right hand is a long life. Yeah. So why would I ask for just one of the fruits of what's in wisdom's hands if I can just ask for wisdom? So I ask the Lord, give me the wisdom, Lord. Please give me the wisdom to obtain wealth. And that's a powerful, powerful prayer, because you're asking for something that is not anybody going to give you wealth. It's how do I get the gift from you, Lord, the wisdom from you to obtain wealth. And I know once He gives that to me, He's going to need me to steward it. But also in the same breath, we mentioned this earlier, God can't bless disobedience. So is He trusting me right now with a little bit, and am I being obedient in that? Because it says in the Bible, if He trusts you a little bit, He will give you more, and He will trust you with more. So I think that more is coming, but right now He's trying to see if He can test me with this. And don't get me wrong, I want success. I want that $1 million that I'm talking about to Catherine. I want gold and silver to leave for my kids. I want generational wealth. It says in the Bible, if you don't leave your children's children wealth, you failed as a man. failed podcasts. And that's not good. I don't want that. I want to be able to leave generational wealth for my family, and it's on me to provide. The Bible also says if you don't provide for your family, you're a fool. So it's like, I got to get out here and I got to get it. So where the path God has brought me, all glory to him. We're glorifying him, and we don't do it for the money, but at the same breath, it's like I'm putting time and energy into this podcast every single week, 20 to 30 hours. In some regard, like, I think it needs to make money. And
nothing wrong with that.
And my wife thinks that too. And my book needs to make money. And like all these things that because we're supposed to be creating like parallel economies to the world, So like I even had a suggestion from a friend recently, like, yo, start your own coffee brand, your own product that you can sell online. We have merch. We have all these opportunities for people to support us and sow into what we're doing. And I believe that is going to come, and I believe God is going to bless it. And I'm looking forward to it, man. I really am. Did I answer your question?
I'm not sure. Not joking. No, but you made me think of something.
Okay, good.
We talked the other day. You had you did a podcast live at a venue, and it was pretty cool. I was glad that I was able to go by there and talk to you for a little bit.
Me too.
We had mentioned our wives for a second, and we mentioned them in the sense that they support us. And like the support has a limit, and you're kind of mentioning finances and stuff like that. Like stuff has to make money. And so for me, doing podcasting, I'm in the same spot. Like I've been doing this for a long time. And how do you see your wife's support, right? Like what does it mean to you? How has she supported you? Because as a man, I'm like, hey, I'm going to do this and that's it. Like I believe in myself. I'm super creative and I want to do this and that. And so you do it. But when you're married, your spouse needs to support you, but there's also a how she supports you. So what have you noticed in her support from the beginning to now? You've been at this for a minute. So now it's like she has real meaning behind what she says.
Absolutely.
What does it look like in the home? And guys need this,
right?
Not only because they're like creatives, but maybe they want to start their own business and they're like, how do I do it? How am I going to get my wife on board? Because things are going to sacrifice, whether it's time or money or you name it.
Yeah.
So what does it look like for you in your home?
Man, and one of the, like, seriously, though, number one thing that I was looking for in a woman was, will she support my dreams? Mm-hmm. Will she support my crazy ideas that I always have?
So when y'all got together, did she know, like, podcasting, or was that you that developed after?
Well, when we first met, I was coming off of the leg of doing, like, the police academy, and I was kind of actively looking for jobs in there, and I was also doing Christian hip-hop. Not Christian hip-hop with some Christian undertones, getting real with people. You can look up my music on Spotify as Barry Allen, and I have a song on there.
I'll do that.
Yeah, called Dear God. It's really good, and have a whole album on there that's really, and in my opinion, is really good because it's very vulnerable. It's open. It was a dark season of life, and I really just opened up about it. But anyway,
I'm going to link it.
All right, there you go. She supported the music, and she did the music with me, and like, she vibed with it. She listened to it in the car, and I was like, yo, all right, shawty, listen to the tunes. Let's go. She didn't put on anything else. She put on my music, So I was really, even though I was rapping about another girl, because it was like, I met her, and all that old music was about another girl, she was still supportive of it, and that was really special to me. And then from there, I met her at my church that I was going to in Florida, and she was actually my son's Sunday school teacher. So she supported the fact that I had a child from a previous relationship, was willing to go on a date with me. So from the beginning, she laid down the undertones of supportive. So fast forward to when I told her that I think God's calling me to be like a pastor and like a voice for Jesus. Like, what do you think? She goes, I don't really want to be a pastor's wife, but I think you should pursue it, because as a pastor's wife, that's a big responsibility. You literally become a pastor by association, by marriage, So like my pastor Alex, his wife is Pastor Brenna, and Pastor Landon, his wife is Pastor Heather, and all that stuff. It's just like, it's kind of how it happens in the church hierarchy. And I don't think she wanted that. She communicated she didn't, but she's never once, ever been like, I don't think you should do this or this. She's never added input that was ever negative. It's always been positive. And to see the journey that I've been on from writing a book, like when I first got a copy of this at the house, bro, you should have seen her enthusiasm, bro. She was like, I love it. Wow, like you did this? That's so cool. Yeah. And then she like took a picture with my son that day, and she like posted about it and was like supportive. And she's never read it, but she at least held it, That's the thing. She don't listen to the pod, and she don't really, she'll engage once in a while if somebody's on that she knows or she's interested in. But for the most part, she doesn't. But she also she's almost like sees the fruit. You know what I mean? She'll experience people at our church coming up to her and talking about, oh, my like this girl in one of her classes says, oh, my mom listens to your dad, to your husband's podcast, you know? And then she'll like randomly encounter people that will talk about me in the podcast and stuff. And she sees that like it has impact. She sees that it helps people grow. She's seen people experience salvation through it. She's seen people like the impact it's made on people's lives, and she supports it. But it's one of those things where it's like, you're doing all these great things, but we need to also be able to like make sure our family's good. So it's kind of like what needs to be sacrificed is the time that you're putting into it. Is it less episodes per month? And we kind of had a conversation recently about it because I've been going super hard recently. So I'm kind of like, all right, so we sowed. Now let's wait for the harvest, you know?
So our wives support us, and we're very thankful.
Amen.
And we either we're going to be working a job 60, 70 hours a week, something creative, something on the nights and weekends, whatever it takes to provide and to be able to fulfill us creatively, right? How do we, right, as men, how do you support your wife? What does that look like? Because sometimes I feel it's very uneven. Because I got the pod and I'm working. I need my wife's support so much because I'm doing a lot. But how do you support your wife? How do you reciprocate?
I love that question because it's so real and it's so true because we need to be that for them. We need to be that somebody they can lean on as well for the things that they want and they have desires for. So one way, my wife has always been a dreamer when it comes to being a stay-at-home mom. So therefore, when we first got pregnant with our oldest son that we had together named Malachi, she was working at a job that was paying well. It was paying like $20 an hour. She was bringing home like, those $600, $700 a week. I was like, let it go, I was enjoying those days, and we had dual income and, but that was her dream. So it's almost like because I'm letting her live out her dream of being a stay-at-home mom, I have so many different things that I do to make money. I would say 5 jobs, and that's the thing. It's like I put in a lot of energy and a lot of time to be able to make sure that she doesn't have to go to work. And another thing that I do to support her, she loves to dance. She was a dancer for 14 years. So every Monday night she goes to a dance class and once a quarter she has a dance recital. So every Monday night I'm home by 4:00 and I'm with the kids. I'm bathing them, I'm feeding them, I'm putting them to sleep. And then boom, she comes home refreshed, recouped, and telling me about her dance class, and she gets to connect with a friend while she's there. And then every now and then she'll hang out with a friend. She's going to a Mercy Culture conference in May for a couple of days on the weekend. She'll go visit her friend in Florida. So she gets her time away from the kids. She gets her time to do what she loves to do, and that's the way I can support her while she supports me on this crazy journey.
It's so hard. Like I see a lot of couples and the support is always leaning one way, and it just depends on who's the alpha, who's stronger, who's wants more influence. And sometimes it's important to look at our wives in the same way. Their efforts, or it's like a stay-at-home mom, will not have the same effect as a podcast or influencing if you ever reach 1 million people, right? But we have to find those things in her dance that really just fills her up, and figure out how do we make this even, because it's not even. Like it consumes time, it consumes stress to support me. And so that's why I asked that, because I think gentlemen out there, they need to hear it, and they need to know that we are looking for ways to support our wives, and sometimes it's a challenge. But when you find it, I would say just dig in deep. I think it's important.
And another thing I think is something those are the bigger things I gave you, but even the smaller things, like when I'm home. And I'm home a lot for the evenings, for the most part, more than I was during the comedy days. This next season might change because of the new thing I was telling you about earlier. But I make sure, even if I cook, I'm doing the dishes. I pretty much do dishes every night. I clean the kitchen every night. I'll take trash out. I'll sweep. I'll do the things that I don't want to do to take the load off her a little bit when I am there. So when I am there, I'm present. I'm like dad, I'm moving, I'm grooving. Like there's hardly any time except during football Sunday that I'm on the couch. A lot of the time I'm trying to keep things moving and being, utilized while I'm there.
When you said she doesn't really listen to your episodes and stuff, and I feel you in that vein, but I want to ask because I'm curious. I'm just wondering where our wives match, since we're kind of on that same trajectory with, like, we're podcasting, we've been doing it for a while. When she does hear an episode and like critique it or give you some feedback, what's some feedback she's giving you? What does it do for your soul. And here's why I'm asking that. We got to support each other, obviously, but an attaboy, a good job, man, it goes a long way. And there's a lot of guys that aren't creatives, and how do their wives support them, right? Are they telling them good job? Are they telling them, hey, you look handsome today? Like, you clean up well. Yeah. So I'm wondering what sticks out. What's a good memory of her giving you feedback on maybe on an episode or something?
Well, I will say my wife, man, as sweet and as gracious and as wonderful she is, compliments are not her strong suit. Really. Her love language is not words of affirmation, you know? Yeah. So I can't even recall a time when she has said something similar, but she's definitely let me know she's proud of me for all the things that we've done. Like the live event show that we did with Pastor Troy Brewer at the end of February. There was a bunch of people that came out, people I didn't know. The vibe was right. Everything was really cool. And she did say, like, yo, I'm proud of you. This was awesome. Like, good job. And so that was really cool because I was like, and she was there. So she got to, like, be there, see it, and it was kind of a really cool experience. And some of the negative things she said to, like, help me out. She's very good at, like, saying the things, she's like honest, she'd be like, yo, you got to sit up straight. You slouch too much when you're like on the podcast, like sit up straight. Don't let your gut all hang out or whatever. And I'm like, geez, all right, like fix your hair, she's like, you're on camera, like, do better, so she's helped me with that aspect of it as well. And I used to say a lot, so she would point it out every time. So now I've really polished my ums,
How did you get rid of the ums? I mean, I call them safe words, or ums fall under that. How'd you do away with it? Did you just tell your head, or like?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with thinking before you speak, which is hard because as such natural conversationalists, we want to just fire from the hip. I think a lot of intentionality, if you know what you're going to say, you're able to communicate it without taking breaks or pauses, and also not being afraid of the silence. Because I've had a podcaster on that does not like any silence and wants to fill all the dead space. And I understand you got to keep people's attention, but also silence is a weapon. Silence is something that can communicate something. Silence is something that will let the small, still voice of God be able to reach somebody in a way that impacts them that your voice could have never done.
Yeah.
Boom.
There you go. So let's jump in. Okay, here's just some questions. I want to see how you're thinking, and you'll get the idea.
Let's dive in.
What do you believe is the purpose or meaning of life, and how does that belief influence the way that you live and make decisions? Obviously, we've gotten an idea on how you think and what you believe, but I just want you to sum it up, because obviously I know that your hope would be that everyone accepts Christ, but it might just be like a positive book, or it might be a mentor for someone, and they have to still take those values and be able to apply them in their life and allow it to influence people around it. How has the Bible, how has God been able to do that for you, where it helps you in your daily decisions and how you live? Practically.
Yeah, well, I think once you know his truth, you're able to see him everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I've really held on to over the last few years is even when I'm not in the Word as much as I should be, even when I'm not listening to enough worship music or I'm not praying as much, I still find God in a lot of things. I find God in relationships. I find God in nature. I find God in little opportunities, little situations, I call them kingdom threads, where God's hand is just moving things left and right. And I think the main purpose of life, outside of loving the Lord, is giving your children a better childhood than you had, giving them better opportunities, and really living this life for them, and putting yourself in a place of sacrifice, and putting yourself in a place of just relying on God to kind of just do what he does with you, and trusting him. A lot of times we fail and we're like, well, maybe we were supposed to fail because we learned this, and maybe that's the way he wanted it to be. Maybe he wanted you to go down this path, so this happened. Like even today, the guest I had on our show, I met that guy through writing a speech for him, and then he came on our show, and like he has 1 million people that follow him on TikTok, and it's like God put that little connection there just for that to branch off into this, and we were able to talk about Jesus on a podcast today because of this one connection of me writing on Fiverr, which if I never did the RV journey and quit my job, I would have never been on Fiverr. So I think God uses everything for his good if you let him.
You mentioned your kids that you want to do better for them. What do you have a memory of, like something that you went through when you were a kid that you're like, I'm intentionally going to do it this way so they don't go through it? Whether it be discipline, whether it be the way you ate or the way you went to Disney, I don't know. What's something that you can see the contrast?
I would say definitely peace in the home.
Yeah.
I want to give that to them. I want them to like, I had to learn how to love my wife. Mm-hmm. I had to learn how to love my kids. I had to learn almost, I don't want to say like the opposite because that's like a stretch, and I'm not trying to like, parents did the best they could, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
But you almost had to learn things you're on my own, almost like choose the opposite path, and like, it's one of those things where you want to be able to love and honor your parents as much as possible, but there's also things where you're just like, man, that just wasn't right, and can we just be honest about it? You know what I mean?
I think we can be.
Can we just be honest about it and just be like, yo, that sucked, and can we take accountability that like, oh, your parents shouldn't be fighting with each other and throwing stuff in the house and having the cops called and spitting on each other and waking each other up in the middle of the night and getting kicked out of the car and walking 25 miles home because you got an argument, and having multiple jobs and job losses and car accidents and all sorts of things.
So you
just
done the opposite
chaos.
of those for sure.
Yeah. So I just want to have a peaceful home, and that's my biggest desire. Even with my son's mom, who we've had conflict before, I just want peace, bro. Like, I just want peace in my life. I didn't have peace growing up. I was constantly in my room listening to arguments, and fights, and like, is my dad going to be here when I wake up? Is like all these questions, of like, am I going to be able to sleep tonight? All these things. And being able to like give my kids that, and like them wake up and like know we're there, and like know we're good, and like enjoy the family, and like want to hang out with us, want to be in the living room with us rather than in their own room isolated, and or like with their friends outside. Like being able to give my kids that and have a family dynamic where my kids want to come home one day when they're adults. That's everything to me. I want a relationship with my kids when they're older where there's never any of these like these traumas or these childhood pasts that are going to keep us separated.
I was disciplining my daughter recently because she got a bad grade. And when you're speaking about childhood and wanting it different now, I had to discipline her, and I saw the pain, because I love her so hard. And I disciplined her, and I was like, whoa, was that too heavy? But I've learned, like, one of the things that I do is I discipline, and then I separate that with the way that I love her. But I have to tell her, even though I know it, but I have to tell her. And nothing, like you said, nothing but love for my mom and dad, but my dad did not communicate that stuff to me. And so when there was discipline, it was drown in that discipline disappointment. Like when he was going to be proud of me, who knows when that was or if it ever happened. I didn't know. There was no separating them. So that's just one thing that when you said that, it made me think of it. And I'm like, and I intentionally have to do it because I remember
the feeling
of not happening. It's just like, oh, you're in trouble. And then from that point forward, like, you got to carry that.
And it's heavy. Yeah, it's heavy. You're just stuck in there, bro.
And I saw it in her, and it affected. And I made the connection. And I'm like, that's what I'm doing in my home, and it has to do with communication. But
yeah, it does.
How do you define happiness and fulfillment? You kind of touch on your kids and wanting to see life a little bit different than when you grew up, but maybe there's another angle that you want to hit it, right? So how do you define happiness and fulfillment, and what actions or practices do you take so that you can live those through your life? And I'm asking as in an individual basis. I know you're a family man, and I know you're a Christ follower, and I get that. But self-care is so important.
Yeah, for sure.
So and I know you're busy, and this. Aside from all of that, right? I'm trying to dig in a little bit deeper because I know the easy answers for that. But what is it? Something that maybe you want to get better at when it comes to you, so that you're better for your happiness and fulfillment.
Man, I love alone time. Like solitude, bro. You give me 4 walls. That's what I call it. 4 walls and nobody in them. Like, bro, I'm at my best because I can create, I can write, I can read, and you give me time, uninterrupted time to just do what I need to do when it comes to like filling my cup up, charging my batteries, and just giving me. And my wife, from time to time, will go to her sister's house, and I'll have like a window of time, and it's a blessing when I don't have stuff on the books that day. But when I'm able to like really hone in and just be home and just like reset and regroup, I feel like that's when I'm at my best, and that's when I'm able to like kind of be sent back out. You know what I mean? It's almost like getting filled up before I'm sent back out to the world. You know, because as you mentioned that I'm busy. It's like a lot of people are pulling on me. A lot of things are in my calendar that are constantly seem to be there. More opportunities are great. It's a blessing, but also it's one of those things where it's like, you can get so focused on helping everybody else that you forget to help yourself, you know, and that's one thing that I'm really working on when it comes to writing this book I'm working on. Right now, it's really just dealing with the loss of my friend that I mentioned earlier and trying to understand how to be healed, you know, and how to live with grief and how to help other people through that. But also, like, this is my story, you know, and this is my story. This is Armani's story. This is the story of Jesus and eternal life. And being able to be happy, I think, is very like come and go. Honestly, happiness has never been a consistent thing for me. It's been more of like I'll get like winds of it. You know, I'll experience the feeling of it. But to constantly remain in that place of bliss, I don't know if that's even reality. I think we focus on it so much in America, is like that's the verbiage that we should all try to pursue, that we miss out on so many other things, because I don't think we're created to just be happy. With all the emotions that we feel, there's no way we can remain happy. You know what I mean? We're being thrown at stuff all the time. And then fulfillment, I think, is doing what you love every single day. I think fulfillment is having freedom financially. I think fulfillment is knowing that your family's healthy and good and that they're safe. I think fulfillment looks like having relationships, having somebody that you can call to help you move, having somebody that you can call to help you come build a chicken coop, you know, somebody that you can call if you ever are in a pinch, you know, and you need somebody there for you, you know, and all those things kind of equal fulfillment in my opinion. And I'm trying my best to like build up these relationships, build this community, build this podcast. I want to one day be in like my own spot, you know, like this is awesome. You have your own spot, but I'm talking even like my own spot, like at my house. Like I want to have like a studio built in my house to where I can do this full time for a living without needing to go pay for studio time or go drive 45 minutes to do X, Y, and Z. It's like, you know, I want to be able to write at my house. I want to be able to live at my house. I want to be able to go to mountains. I want to be able to like wherever the Lord takes me to be able to do what I do and do what I love.
Looking back at your podcast journey, what lessons have you learned? What was your idea of podcasting in the beginning, and how is it different now? How has it matured?
Well, yeah, when I started, man, I was just starting on, and luckily because of stand-up, I had some experience on the microphone. I've done podcasts with a couple comedian friends that I was in circles with. I even started my own podcast one time called The Good Life Podcast. I started a podcast called The Interview Room, and then I basically, finally, I Like Birds became the epiphany of all epiphanies, because it was no longer about me. It was no longer about my guests. It was like, because I don't want people to come here and listen. I want them to like me, obviously. You know, I'm a person too, but I want you to come for Jesus, but also enjoy like what I bring to the table when it comes to Jesus, right? So, and I didn't go into it with any expectation of like, I want to do this. It was all like the Lord being like, yo, you need to tell people about what you're learning, what you're passionate about, who I am. And I was like, Lord, I've only read like 1 or 2 books. I've read Proverbs and John. And he was like, I'm not asking you to tell them everything. I'm just asking them to tell them everything you do know. You know, like start where you're at. And like that has value and that has journey to it. And you can really grow in that. So when I started it, my expectation honestly was that like 4 to 5 people would listen. And then when I saw that we had like 1,000 plays after only 23 episodes, I was like, yo, this is something. I was experiencing people like going to church for the first time. My best friend who passed away was coming to Christ as well with his fiance at the time named Kelly. And they came on our show and started sharing like, because of the podcast, they've been reading their Bible, and like it got everybody that was in my circle like to take God serious for once. You know what I mean? And that was like so special. And then it evolved into me going on an RV journey, recording in the RV, and then it evolved from me going to Africa, recording a podcast under a tree, and then getting people involved on the book journey and getting them involved with merch and getting them deeper rooted into the show.
So far away from 4 or 5 listeners.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we just started really building it and growing it, and that's the thing. You know, we lost some people when we started talking about politics, but that's okay. You know, we were speaking our truth at the time, and ends up being a lot of it was right, what I was sharing, because I was very honest, and I think vulnerability and honesty go a long way when it comes to connecting with the audience. And then from there, I got invited to do a show at the studio that I'm at now, and I started talking to the producer there, and then he got me booked in once a month. And then when I started doing video, I just fell in love with the process of it because it became more visual. It became more like, oh, people can kind of see what's going on now. Yeah. And then once they find it visually, maybe they'll go back and they'll listen to the early episodes, where that's where a lot of the meat and potatoes is of the gospel. Because now it's conversational, you know? So now it's like, I'm hearing your testimony, and I'm hearing what God's done for you, which is great because I don't want to be the only voice for Jesus that people ever hear. So it's been great to be able to collab on that. But when it comes to like the real heart of I Like Birds, it's in the first 3 seasons of like, yo, I'm alone in this. I'm with God. Like this is what the Bible says. I'm mispronouncing stuff all the time. You know, I'm in Bible college. It's a whole thing. You know, so it's been really cool to just evolve it to now we're dropping clips. We're doing live events. Like it's been crazy.
It's come a long way.
And honestly, it's all. I don't want to say like it's. You talk about success earlier. I don't want to say like it's God had nothing to do with it. God had everything to do with it. But also, like, I've been bold, brother.
Yeah.
I've been bold with it. I've been like, by faith, I've been like, let's do a live audience show with one of the biggest pastors in DFW that I've never done before on a whim, on a Tuesday night. Boom, let's do it. Yeah. We did it. And then it's from there, it's like, you know, what else can you do? You know, I have an idea that I want to go into prison and do a podcast. I want to go on a boat and do a podcast. Like I want to just keep doing cool stuff for God. I love creating stuff for God. I love talking about God in cool settings, you know. So even on here, it's like you talked about, we're going to be talking about the podcast. I'm like, all right, well, God's going to come up. You know, I just can't help it. You know, every show I go on.
And I listen to you enough to know that, and that's why I'm asking questions a certain way.
Yeah.
Because obviously, as a believer, you know, you're herding sheep or you catching fish. There's a difference between those, and so that's why I'm asking questions a certain way, because my audience is maybe they're not in church yet, but they know what I believe, and they know they know who I am, and so this only helps me communicate with them. So I think you've done good. You know, I really have enjoyed our conversation. I hope that I've presented my questions well. I'm definitely not trying to press you or anything. I just felt like I just wanted to
let's dig deep, bro.
Yeah. Like if someone's watching, can't like this is a funny. You tell me your thought. This is more of an interaction thing. It's not a question. Okay. People sometimes find it difficult to communicate with a strong believer, right? Like you're trying to have a normal conversation, but you can't because you're so on fire. So every reference, every statement, everything, which I get it and it makes sense. But I'm also trying to show, you know what, we're having a normal conversation. We're doing the Felt podcast, and we're both expressing ourselves to encourage people to get in an uncomfortable situation or to have a conversation with someone that doesn't maybe see eye to eye on things. And that's how I believe that communities come together, is in conversation. And so in a way, I was doing that, but on a very light note. Yeah. And so I think you're a pro, like I said earlier. So I thank you for that. 2 more questions. The first one is, when it comes to communication, right? And you've been doing comedy for a while. That's like a one-way thing. You're talking and you're getting people's reactions through laughter. Podcasting to me is a little bit different, especially the style that you do. You're communicating and you're feeding off of what someone's saying, and you're going back and forth, and your stuff is long format, right?
Yeah.
So how do you see communication? What are some of the tools or things that you know you've developed in communication that can probably help someone become a better communicator?
I think listening, man, and I can't stress it enough. If even when I do the podcast, sometimes I'll catch myself like, and maybe you've experienced this too, thinking about the next question or thinking about something that's kind of related to the show, but not as much related to what the words that are coming out of their mouth. If you listen and you don't respond until after you finish listening, I guarantee you will have something better to say than if you were to think about what you're going to say before you actually spoke.
Yeah.
And people don't want to admit that that's true, but that's the truth, because you're allowing your brain to process fully what they said and then respond, rather than you captured the hook, you captured the intro of a statement.
Yeah.
So it's like, listen all the way in its entirety. It's okay if you have to pause. It's okay if you have to add something in between the next question or the next point of conversation or the next ebbs and flow of it. So I really learned that listening is very valuable. And people want to be heard, bro. And that's a big thing. People want to be heard, and people feel they're not worthy of being heard, you know? And with this podcast, it really let me see that even if somebody doesn't tune in that you thought would tune in, somebody is. You know, we check the numbers, and of course it's something that goes up and down over time depending on the guests. But at the end of the day, man, people are still wanting to know what you have to say, which is a beautiful thing for you, Sam. And it's a beautiful thing for me because I wasn't anybody special before I started I Like Birds. I did comedy, but in regards of like a big name or somebody that like nobody knew my name for the most part, you know, and in Texas a little bit because of the comedy scene, but even that, not the internet, you know, and then the internet started finding out my name due to the podcast, due to God just putting me on a different level of freelance writing on Fiverr, and then also I Like Birds, and then writing the book. You know, it's almost like I've channeled a digital real estate, you know, and it's all built on the back of communicating, you know, and that's so rare, and it's such an honor to be able to do so. But being able to reach people and connect with people and make them laugh and find the funny and get honest and get vulnerable, it's like, why can't we do that? The world is so masked right now when it comes to like being real, that you can literally be real and make a name for yourself because it's so rare. Yeah. So my advice on communicating, just be real, you know?
It's funny because when you said listening, and I believe it, like I practice active listening and I always try to hone my communication skills, but I'm known for interrupting on the pod, but it always depends on who's my guest. And so I can feel when someone's on autopilot, like here's the answer and here's the spiel. So I always interrupt them to dig in deep on somewhere that they didn't think someone was going to dig deep in. So that's the only reason why I listen, but I do interrupt.
Yeah, and
but
it's also communicating.
It's almost a tactic.
It is a tactic. Especially as a host, you want to like create that tension of like and press in where they don't think you're going to press in too. My pastor Alex gave that suggestion to me too. He's like, press them in a little bit, you know, like when they're saying something, give a little pushback, challenge it, you know, like make them go deeper, make them actually make the audience know that they believe what they're actually saying.
Yeah, because we speed through things so that they're going to overlook it. I'm going to say it, but they'll overlook it. And so I kind of did that today, but I've enjoyed it. It's been great. Here's the last question. Failure, obviously the failed podcast. What's your definition or advice on failure?
Man, it's part of the journey. You have to. You literally have to. And you have to embrace it. You have to really just be like, all right, cool. Like that comedy 3 years, like it didn't really get me much, you know, and like I wouldn't say it failed, but it definitely it wasn't the path that I was supposed to be on. I was always supposed to be funny, but I wasn't supposed to be like a comedian first. You know what I mean? I was supposed to be a Christ follower first and let funny be a gift, you know? And so that's just one example because we've been talking about that for so long, but there's been so many things I failed in. I failed in a relationship. I failed in parenting before. I failed in so many aspects of life. In police academy, I mentioned that earlier. I went to the police academy for 6 months. I went to college for 2 years to be a cop. 2 years college, maybe even 3 years. You know, it was community college, so there's probably a bonus year on there, I think, as well. So 3 years community college, 6 years or 6 months police academy, and then when I got out, I applied for an academy or a job at one of the spots there in Florida, and I was honest with them, and I shared with them that in my previous, you know, high school days, I sold marijuana, and they blackballed me. They had a zero tolerance policy against selling narcotics, so they put a little thing on my application that said I can't get a job anywhere in Florida, and I was a stud cadet, bro. Defensive Tactics Award, going hard, got A's on all my stuff, and all I did was just be honest about something I did in high school. That's not even a big deal anymore, but back then I was like, you know, so. But that's failure. I was so bummed. I thought like my life was over because my career path that I chose failed. But then God led me to my wife. God led me to comedy. God led me to the podcast. God led me to write books. And now he's leading me, you know, who knows next?
Yeah. That's a whole nother pod. Anyways, there you go, guys, right there. Whatever you want to plug, go ahead. It's up to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody that listened will understand that my heart for God is big and bright, and even when I fail on my faith journey, he is gracious, he is good, and he doesn't fail. He's always victorious, you know. So everything I do is I can walk boldly into the throne room. That's what the Bible says, because of his grace. So if you want to, you know, grow spiritually, I encourage you to check out the I Like Birds podcast. It's on all platforms. YouTube is the best experience, as you can watch the conversations, and you can see more of the short form clips as well as the mid form clips that we've been posting on there, especially for YouTube. And then you can get my book at 21 Days in Africa, either on my website website at ilikebirdsministry.com, and I'll sign it and send it your way. Or you can go on Amazon and you can get it on there for only 2 days, like 2-day delivery if you have the Prime. So Amazon's the easiest path, but if you want to go ahead and get a signed copy, my website is always great.
Any questions, comments, or concerns you have for me, and then I'll put a button on this.
What's next for you in this podcast?
Well, that's a big question. Well, we have some live events coming up in the month of May, and then my lineup as far as guests is expanding outside of Texas, and so that's just it. Just some bigger guests, with a lot of wisdom that to share and partake, and there's bigger goals we'll talk about off camera. I can't spill all the beans.
I know, right? You got to give the people a little taste, a little something to look forward to.
All I say is stay tuned, man. Hey, there's some good stuff on the way.
Absolutely. In Jesus' name, we declare and decree it.
So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Brother. I enjoyed our conversation.
Me too, man. Thank you.
Guys, thank y'all so much for tuning in to the Phil Podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. I hope you learned something. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. I'm going to have the link to our guest underneath. Check everything out, man. Thank y'all so much, and we'll see you on the next one.